Byrd. Thank you for staying with us. Oh, look at that. They love us. You didn't get that kind of applause, Steve.
Alright, so we're here to do some myth busting. Unlike the Discovery Channel show, we're not going to actually blow up anything physical, but we're going to try to blow up people's misconceptions. So basically, this came out of, we're in a chat together, and every once in a while we'll see somebody just repeat the same thing over and over that we've heard many times, and it's incorrect, and I make a grumpy face, and then so on and so forth. What we're just trying to do is set the record straight on a couple things that you keep hearing out there that might not actually be true, and we're not trying to, shame anybody or call anybody out, because, everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes. Birds probably make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
It's really, just kind of like letting people know stuff that you might have heard wrong about. So let's just dive right into it with an easy example.
Well, this is one that I just can't believe we have to do. But it's still like, whenever me and Kevin see it on a Facebook thread, we screenshot it and send it to each other like, oh my god, why doesn't this die? But yes, this is the Godzilla King Kong vs. Godzilla has two endings, one for the Japanese cut, one for the American cut, which both versions of that are readily available, and I mean, it's just not true. And so that was perpetuated at first in Spaceman magazine, which was, I guess, a pre-Famous Monsters Forrest Ackerman publication, and it's somehow lived ever since, and it's just become like lore. And this is one that you really wouldn't think that would still be popular, but it is. And the only difference between the two endings is you hear Godzilla's roar at the very end of when the end title, the end screen comes on. Everything else is exactly the same.
Yep, it comes up in like Trivial Pursuit, right?
yeah, right.
Here's another one that just kind of grinds my goat because it snowballs, because one person posts a photo of Agent Tsuburaya with the caption Ishiro Honda, and another person sees that and says, that must be Ishiro Honda, and posts another unrelated photo of Agent Tsuburaya and captions it Ishiro Honda.
Like the picture we have here is one of them's from Encyclopedia Britannica. The other image is the booklet for the UK Eureka Blu-ray of the H-Man in Battle in Outer Space.
The director's spotlight on Ishiro Honda. So yeah, it's try to point it out whenever people get it wrong, because this guy is Ishiro Honda, or is it Inoshiro Honda? And are they the same person? This is another one that sometimes comes up and gets confused, because some people are under the assumption that there was a guy Ishiro Honda who worked with Akira Kurosawa, and then there was an unrelated guy Inoshiro Honda who worked on the Godzilla movies, and no, they are in fact the same person. What it basically comes down to is Japanese is a difficult language, and there's different ways to read people's names. If you look at the first character of Ishiro, it's the kanji for boar, and it can be read as Ino, like think of like Inosuke in Demon Slayer. So people who didn't know it very well would read it and transcribe it that way, and it winds up in several of the U.S. cut credits that way. And you see that with a lot of credits. Like I've seen Tsuburaya transcribed as Antani, and you think, oh, how did that happen? And the answer is Japanese is hard. This is another one that just kind of like it's a peccadillo of mine. It's that pebble in my sock, because every time I see this spelling, the G-O-J-I-R-A, as some sort of like, this is the original way that you're supposed to write this, or just say this is the original movie, and then for some reason all of the subsequent movies have a different spelling of the creature Gojira. It's always been spelled from the beginning by Toho with the G-O-D-Z-I-L-L-A. And this was a decision made intentionally by Toho Iwamori, and it was sold internationally under under that spelling. You can find publicity materials from the time that use the spelling, and it's just a little bit of a difficulty because if you see G-O-D-Z-L, if you see the spelling that we're used to, the correct spelling, in English, you naturally think, okay, Godzilla, and if you see the Japanese transcription, you think closer to the Japanese pronunciation, but it's, you know, it's derivative of the word gorilla. It's going to have the LLA at the end. So just know that the way that it's split up is the DZI is G. So if you say Godzilla, then you can see how that spelling came about. So it was not really a change made by the American side of things. And this is something that I see quite a bit with Western releases of Japanese titles that have English titles. You know, the movie Ring has an English word, ring, but for some reason when it got brought over here, they said Ringu. And that's just saying the Japanese title with a Japanese accent. And if you look at the original Japanese title, it just says the ring on it. Same deal with Mothra. You know, moth is an English language word for those that don't know. And yet sometimes you see it written out with the M-O-S-U, Mosu, because that's a transcription. And you know, same deal with Nobuhiko Oyashi's house. You know, it's not that the Japanese title would have ever been written in a Japanese context with the straight transcription. So that's just one of those things. Like, if the title's in English already, just write it in English. Don't transcribe it into Japanese and then from Japanese into English.
Here's one that, I'm out of order here, but yeah, here's one that I've seen a couple times that I think was originally perpetuated by a certain American writer in a kind of infamous book. That there's multiple things in here that originated there. One of them is that Akihiko Hirata and Akira Takarada switched roles in Godzilla 54 with Hirata playing Ogata and Takarada playing Serizawa, and this is one Ishiro Honda was able to live through to debunk. You know, he did an interview that said it's unthinkable that that would be the case. So, put that on the rest. Here's another language one for you.
Yeah, so this is a quick one. If you see certain versions of the Godzilla vs. Destroyer, including like the Australian DVD, Emiko gets called grandmother in the subtitles, and that's just somebody not quite hearing correctly, because, you know, she is the main character's aunt, and it's very easy in Japanese because Oba-san is grandmother and Oba-san is aunt, and if you don't really know how these characters are related, I can see a translator just kind of assuming like, oh, this old lady must be their grandmother.
Oh boy, here we go. So one of the most famous pieces of lost media is the spider pit sequence in the original King Kong. And a lot of people have said, oh, I saw a revival screening that showed it. Ray Bradbury claims that he saw it, and to which, you know, his best friend Ray Harryhausen just sit next to him and roll his eyes and be like, yeah, sure, Ray. Bradbury said a lot of stuff. He also claimed that he remembered seeing light come through the birth canal as he was being born, so he's an interesting guy. But by all accounts, that was never shown to an audience. You know, we have a letter from Marion C. Cooper himself saying, you know, any scenes that were removed when he left RKO, and they had a big fire in the 50s, and any Kong material that was laying around, he feels was destroyed in that fire. And then he even says in that same letter, the spider pit sequence was never seen in any theater. I cut it out before Max Steiner even scored the film. So if it was in any version of it, you would have the music with it. You know, in that same letter, he also says that he took it out just because he felt that scene kind of derailed the plot, didn't have much to do with Kong. So, you know, that's the other one is like, oh, it was too scary for audiences, but it was never shown to audiences. So.
Filmed, right?
Yeah, when I interviewed Roy Morton, who's a Kong scholar and a film writer on my podcast, he's under the impression after his research, looking through all the papers and stuff, he says he doesn't feel like it was ever even filmed. And there's really debate over that because depending on what script notes you look at, and a lot of them it's crossed off, the shooting schedules, and but it seems like the most logical middle ground to that, because O'Brien also said that was one of his favorite pieces of animation that he ever did. But I think it's likely because there are those photos, and those were test photos, and I think it's logical to assume that he may have done some test animation when those photos were taken as well. Speaking of the spider pit, this is one that drives me so crazy that during COVID, when I was working from home and just largely bored, I was like, I need to figure out if this is true. And I did this huge deep dive, and I wrote an article for John LeMay's magazine, Lost Fanzines, which later got republished in the second edition of his Kong and May book. But I interviewed stop motion experts, people that knew Willis O'Brien and his family. And this is a common one. You see it everywhere from IMDb to Wikipedia, whatever. Don't read everything. Don't believe everything you see on the internet. In fact, I was made aware that even in a panel that occurred at this convention, this was repeated just, yesterday or the day before. But that's the Black Scorpion, the Willis O'Brien giant insect movie, repurposed models from that old spider pit sequence. You can read the article that I just mentioned, but just to keep this kind of short and sweet, there's really no real logical way that could have happened. Obi didn't keep his models, and those were RKO property. Around the same time when Jim Danforth visited RKO when he was making Jack the Giant Killer, he did see some Kong props, including some of the dinosaurs, and he said they were too dilapidated to use. The Black Scorpion is nearly a quarter century apart from Kong, and those models just did not hold up over time anyway. Some of the real stop motion experts, like Mark Wolf that I talked to, he was saying the Black Scorpion models weren't even constructed the same because there were advancements in the medium. They used ball and socket joints in the armatures as opposed to the ways they were made during Kong. So that's one that really just on the surface it seems plausible, but then when you start to kind of scrutinize it, it quickly falls apart.
So this is another one that we sometimes hear things about Kaiju's gender, and that's to some extent I think a language barrier issue, just because the way that gendered pronouns work in Japanese is differently, and that usually a gendered pronoun is a first-person pronoun in Japanese versus in English where it would be a third-person pronoun. You say he or she as opposed to boku or atashi. And the thing is, monsters usually don't talk, so they don't convey that all that well. Along those lines, one thing that we find every once in a while popping up, and this has kind of been dying off in recent years, is this notion that the Showa, the second Godzilla that shows up is a female monster. And as far as I can tell, this goes back to the English language release. The Godzilla was reading to Gigantus, and Ian Thorne's book, she basically says that this is a female monster, and I think a lot of people growing up reading that just assume, okay, well that means Godzilla is female all along. Now there are, believe it or not, actually Showa female Godzillas and weird offshoot things like some of the video games or the Space Godzilla short story. But there's other gender-related items here and there, like we keep hearing about how the 90s later Mothra Leo is male. As far as I can tell, that's just an assumption that's made based on the antennae, but I haven't seen anything specific.
The subtitles, yeah.
Yeah, well, the subtitles use all three genders for Mothra in that trilogy. It's very confusing there. A similar deal, Zerum is my favorite monster movie from Japan, and the director Akira Amamiya specifically said that that's a female monster, but has a very male kind of silhouette. So I think a lot of even in those official subtitles it says he, even though the creator has said that it is a female monster. So stop misgendering Zerum.
Here's one that pops up, used to pop up way more, but I still see it from time to time, but that was Rodan. The Japanese name for Rodan is Radon, and there's been this decades-old rumor that it was changed to Rodan because they didn't want to get it confused with a brand of soap from the UK. Looking into it, we found out that the soap was actually called Radion, and so that's just another one that just doesn't really make sense when you go back and look at the details. And
wasn't even on the market.
Right, yeah. I think maybe you could say the element radon, maybe they wanted to have, but nothing to do with soap.
So, for some reason, there's a lot of miscommunication about the Luminous Fairies in Mothra, which was kind of an early version of the movie Mothra that came out as a novel. And I guess for whatever reason, people have latched onto it and said like, oh, Mothra is a novel adaptation in a way that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of things, because it was always going to be a movie, and it was a very common practice at Toho at the time to start, Tomiyama would go to a novelist and say, write a novel that we will use to form into our movie. And that happened with Half Human, that happened with Rodan, with Godzilla Rides Again. But for some reason, Mothra, I think because it has a different title, people have latched onto. And if you look at when the novel was published, it was just a couple months before the movie came out. It also has 3 credited authors, which is not normally the way novels are written if they're not, a collaborative pitch for a movie-going experience. But the weirdest thing that I hear coming up sometimes is like, oh, this was the original thing that predates Godzilla, and I don't know how people make that connection because it does not make any sense for that to happen that way. Similarly, I often hear talk about like, oh, this thing is based on the original manga for some of these TV shows, and here are many examples. And it's more complicated than that, because all of these were originally going to be TV shows, but the studios behind them, I mean in this case these are all Toei, would approach a famous manga author, be it Mitsutaro Yokoyama or Go Nagai or Shotaro Ishinomori, to develop these characters. And they would have a tie-in comic that comes out concurrently with the TV show, but it's not like the comic came out and was very popular and then they adapted it into a TV show, which is normally the way that these things happen nowadays.
This one's kind of unfortunate because it's really not what anyone intended, but this is another one I've seen often, is that, let's be real, the Toho Kong suits aren't the most flattering images of that monster. And some people have taken that to assume that, oh, they must have done this on purpose because it's an American monster, and, oh, we want to make fun of it, but the Toho Kongs are more a product of their budget, the time that those films were put together. I know Keizo Murase said that King Kong in 1962 went through several redesigns and things to try to meet whatever standards RKO wanted. They're not the best, but the truth is, Eiji Tsuburaya, who we know is the special effects master behind all these films and created so much of these scenes. Seeing King Kong in 1933 when he was young is what made him choose to, it basically changed his life. Kong was his favorite movie character. He would tell his kids and grandkids stories about King Kong for bedtime, and you have this quote here about King Kong versus Godzilla and how special it was to do a Kong film. He said, "I couldn't help working on this instead of my other fantasy films. The script is special to me. It makes me emotional because it was King Kong that got me interested in the world of special photography techniques when I saw it in 1933. So he was a very passionate, hardcore Kong fan. So that's just, again, no real basis in reality. A similar one that I see a lot is King Ghidorah being a metaphor for China. This invader from outside, and I guess academics have read it as, it's Japan's anxiety about China. This is another one Ishiro Honda was alive to debunk. He said, it's basically a modern take on Yamato no Orochi, the 8-headed dragon from old the old Japanese folk tale, and we wrote it as a creature that came from outer space. So it's fine if you want to think it's China, but that is not what the intent was.
All right, I think this is going to be a relatively quick one just because I see it come up quite a bit. It's like, oh, Godzilla's dancing the Highland Fling or so on and so forth. It keeps getting called the Highland Fling quite a lot, and that's not the dance that he's doing. And it was kind of a very important pop cultural zeitgeist dance at the time called the shit dance. And it comes from a manga, Osomatsu-kun, which was super popular at the time. And if you start watching Japanese media, you'll just see it come up over and over and over. And you know, there's one of the Beatles doing it. Like, come on, it's all over. Get the dance name right. Here's another one that sometimes people make assumptions about, that they know that Tsuburaya was working for Toho, and suddenly he went off and he created his own company and started using, some Toho resources, and a lot of people interpret this as Tsuburaya went behind Toho's back and kind of like betrayed all of the goodwill that he had built up making these Godzilla movies to launch his own personal career. And that's kind of like not the way it went down, because Toho actually invested heavily in Tsuburaya Productions when it was first created. They co-produced a bunch of projects with them, and they actually they owned Tsuburaya Productions until 1992. So it was the idea that Toho was all aghast and then scandalized that these Toho resources were being robbed from them to go make these television programs. It doesn't make any sense, because they, if you watch the Champion Mastery movies in the theater, they have Ultraman shorts right next to the Godzilla movies, or Daikaiju versus Goliath was a co-production between them. Here's one that I actually had to, in preparation for this panel.
I thought this was true until we started doing it.
Exactly. So there is an unaired episode of Ultra 7, not to be confused with the banned episode of Ultra 7. I think it was supposed to be episode 34, Revenge of 300 Years. According to the legend, what happened was this episode was filming, and there was an accident where Ant's actress Yuriko Hishimi was almost crushed to death under a giant inflatable Ultra 7 hand, and she was so traumatized that she went to Tsuburaya and said, "You can't show this on television." I just scrapped the whole episode, and they said, "Okay, we'll just make another episode 34 instead." And that's a great story that really came about in the 90s. It was not part of the actual historical record. Basically, this was something from a television feature. There was a movie called My Beloved Ultra 7 that was a dramatization of the making of the series, and that's what this scene was in, and a lot of people took it at face value. Now, Revenge of 300 Years was a script that was written, but it was not filmed, and it was probably just too expensive to be made into an episode, so it's an unmade concept that they used for this TV movie. Here's one that I see coming up every once in a while, and I think it's just people making assumptions, and it could potentially get them in trouble. And that's that a lot of old Kaiju movie dubs are in the public domain, and you get these kind of fly-by-night companies that put out packs of Kaiju movies, assuming that they can get away with it because nobody's going after them, but that doesn't actually mean that they're in the public domain. What happened is the American distributors for a lot of these, be it Cinema Shares or AIP, would not put the copyright information at the beginning of the credits. So normally with an American movie, if that happens, like a famous example is Night of the Living Dead, it does wind up in the public domain, but the thing is, those are derivative works of Japanese movies. The Japanese copyright holders still own the copyrights, so if you put out Monster from the Prehistoric Planet, Nikatsu could actually go after you and be like, "Hey, this is our intellectual property, so don't do that if you don't want to get sued." Here's just another one that I hear a lot of, like, there could never be a crossover between Gamera or Godzilla, or Ultraman and Godzilla could never meet each other, and that hasn't happened in a movie. That doesn't mean that it couldn't ever happen, or in fact that it never actually happened. There's just a whole litany of examples examples of crossovers. They just have not been in high-profile projects. They've been in stage shows, in puppet shows, in video games, in promotional art, and it happens a lot. Like, they are different studios, but the studios have to get along. But it doesn't mean that they can't get along. It's just sometimes they don't want to get along.
Here's one that I see a lot, and that's that the design for Gappa was recycled from, before Ultraman was Ultraman, the concept was Bemler, which was an alien hero character that was kind of bird-like, and we always heard that concept art was recycled into Gappa from Nippatsu, but that's really doesn't make any sense. It's different studios that really wouldn't have had that kind of communication with each other. It's really just that those two, the Bemler concept and Gappa, were two characters that were drawing on the same kind of influences from Japanese mythology, the Tengu, the Kappa, creatures like that.
Yeah, at that point in time, yokai were on the upswing in Japan. You get the yokai monsters movies right after Gappa comes out because of Kitaro and Nakamoto and things like that. So it makes sense that they would just go to the Garda and say.
Here's another one, Destroy All Monsters. Everyone knows the scene of Gorosaurus coming up and out of the ground in Paris, in Paris. In the dialogue, in both versions, Japanese version and the American dub, it said that it's Baragon doing the attack. The Baragon suit at that point in time had been lent out for Subaraya for really a lot of different monsters to be, messed with and redesigned. And the tale was always that it was a last-minute decision to not use Baragon because the suit was too damaged. But it's another one that, looking into the situation, it was more a logistical issue with Baragon. I think they were concerned with something about his ears and how it would work with the set they wanted to use. And this goes back even to the point of pre-production where like the storyboards for that scene showed Gorosaurus coming out of the ground and not Baragon. So the decision to replace Baragon with Gorosaurus was not made at the last minute as a last minute thing. It was made pretty early between the script and the filming. Here's another one that I see a lot, even to the point where there was a recent book authorized by Toho, the book written by Graham Skipper, the big official guide to Godzilla. I don't remember what it's called, but there's a few missteps in information in that book. One of them being that this old tale about Ken Satsuma having to have his appendix removed while he was wearing the Hedorah suit. And that didn't happen, and Satsuma even said in an interview, kind of said what happened, and he was not wearing the suit. What had happened was he had appendicitis when he was promoting the film, and he had to get the surgery, and during that procedure, he discovered he was unaffected by painkillers. And that forced the doctor to knock him out with chloroform in order to perform the procedure. And he was wearing the Hedorah suit during this promotional appearance shortly before his diagnosis, and that's kind of where the truth gets blurred, and where that kind of urban legend came from. But no, he did not have to wear the Hedorah suit while getting surgery.
Okay, this is a rumor that I heard for a few years, and it comes down to a miscommunication and the fact that it would have been really cool if it were true. That Shigeru Mizuki, the creator of Gigagen no Kitaro, is sometimes credited with the design of Gigan. And if you look at Godzilla vs. Gigan, that movie's such a comic book to begin with that you would think, okay, yeah, it makes sense it would go to a big comic book person to design the monster. And Mizuki does have this character, the Amaraki, that looks kind of like Gigan, and people were drawing assumptions between it. And basically what happened that caused all of this is when it came to the design of Gigan, Teruyushi Nakano basically made a statement that the creature was designed by Mizuki at Kodansha. Turns out he was talking about Takayoshi Mizuki, who's not listed in the credits. He didn't know that he wasn't listed in the credits, so he never came forward and said that no, I actually designed it until much, much later, and people started looking into this. This is one that, due to just language barriers, people make all sorts of assumptions because exploitation movies get remarketed and rebranded in Germany and other places in Europe in strange ways. And this was a common thing. It's not just the kaiju movies. A good example would be the Western movie Django came out, and it was a huge hit in Germany. So when another movie starring the same actor, Texas Adios, came over to Germany, they renamed it Django der Reicher, and named the main character Django, but otherwise it's just the same unrelated movie. And you get the same thing with all of the, a lot of these dubs that you see in Germany for kaiju movies, where, you know, Jet Jaguar is renamed King Kong, but otherwise it's the same movie. But people look at these posters and they make strange claims like, oh, in this movie, Jet Jaguar is actually King Kong whose brain's been transplanted into a robot. I think that's not anything that they say in the dub. And you see similar things with, you know, in Gamera versus Baragon. Baragon was renamed to Godzilla, or in a lot of the other movies, they have, you know, throwaway lines about Frankenstein because Frankenstein was really popular there, but they didn't fill new scenes for Germany or anything like that. These cuts are basically the same, and just little tweaks and a lot of characters getting renamed because certain names have better marquee value.
This is a really old one that has been around for a long time, if anyone's seen the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla cartoon, you know, one of the first things you might notice is that his iconic roar is missing. And for the longest time, the rumor was that Toho wanted more money to use the actual roar, and sounds like stuff Toho might do, but I had the chance to interview a guy named Dwayne Poole for my podcast, who was basically kind of the showrunner of that series, and I asked him about it directly, and he said, you know, no, that was something early on that, you know, we decided against using the roar because in the show, the whole concept of the show is Godzilla has to have, you know, a sort of relationship with these characters on this boat, and, you know, he needs to be able to express himself. You know, he needs to be able to, his vocalizations need to be able to have a lot more variance than what, you know, the Toho sound effects had. So, yeah, that's one that I just took it upon myself to ask about because I just kept seeing it over and over. And so, yeah, that was that's an interesting one that I think we can finally put to bed. Another big one is that Toho banned Yoshimitsu Banno from Godzilla in the 70s after Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Variation on that is that they banned him from working on Toho films. And while it is true that the producer, Tomoyuki Tanaka, was in the hospital for the majority of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, he wasn't there to oversee it, and he was kind of weirded out by the final product and really didn't like it much and thought it was really just strange, and he kind of laid into the people that, you know, were supervising the production while he was gone. But his relationship with Banno really doesn't seem that it was super contentious. Right after that, Banno he co-wrote Prophecies of Nostradamus for Toho, and he was in charge of the second unit filming. He did a lot of, if you've seen the movie, he did a lot of the New Guinea sequences. After Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, before Terror of Mechagodzilla came into existence, they asked him, like, they were like, hey, you know, how do you feel about doing the next Godzilla movie? And you know, there was a concept he had for Godzilla fighting this big starfish monster, and then at one point he had written a treatment for Godzilla vs. Hedorah 2 that would take place in Africa. And then, you know, eventually the decision was made to move forward with the Mechagodzilla sequel. And they kind of kept him in the loop even. In 1978, Banno was one of a selection of people, including some sci-fi writers, some film critics, that sat in on something called the Godzilla Revival Meeting, where they kind of just had people come in and advise on, like, okay, where do we want the series to go next? And, you know, nothing happened until '84, but yeah, he kind of stuck around.
So one that I hear a lot from Hawaiian fans, I think particularly just because Kaiju was really huge in Hawaii, was this idea that the villain in that show, Hakaider, was the inspiration inspiration for Darth Vader, and you can kind of see why people would make that assumption based on, he wears black armor and has a relationship with the main character. And the thing that people point to is there was a statement made by Toru Hirayama, the Toei producer, while he was promoting Message from Space, that, Star Wars was inspired by one of our things, so it's okay if we rip off Star Wars, basically. But he was not actually talking about Kaiju. He was talking about Musha Kamen from Go Ranger. So like that whole thread kind of falls apart very quickly when you start to look at it. And there's a lot of Japanese influence in Star Wars, but yeah, Kaiju is most likely not one of them because nobody's ever mentioned that who worked on Star Wars.
This is one that for a long time was kind of spread around a lot, and that's that Space Sheriff Gavin, the Toei series and character, had inspired RoboCop. This was largely an American writer about the genre had said that, and his account was that the effects master Steve Wang had showed Rob Bottin, who worked on RoboCop, Space Sheriff Gavin, because Steve Wang's a huge Tokusatsu nerd. This is another one I was able to interview Steve Wang directly, and he said it absolutely not true because he didn't even meet Rob Bottin until like the 2000s or something at like a convention. So they didn't know each other. When you look at RoboCop's design genesis, I mean, the early versions were more like looking a lot like Judge Dredd, and then it was the Japanese artist Sorayama, who's famous for these kind of sexy robot characters. That was what they looked to. They wanted RoboCop to look a little sexier, and so they kind of made a male version of his robot art, which you see an example in the slide of a heavy metal magazine cover that he did. This is another one I see all the time. And Pulgasari, the North Korean film, the suit that Ken Satsuma, who played Godzilla, the suit that was used in that movie was the '84 Godzilla suit, but I don't think that really holds up, does it, Kid?
No, I mean, if you look at like this picture here, like the Godzilla head doesn't come off like that, so it just does not make any sense.
They don't even really look in the snout. They look kind of similar, maybe, but they really don't even look.
I think it's the eyes that get people. Most of the suit, not so much. This is just a quick one. A lot of people assume that because The Last Dinosaur was a co-production between Tsuburaya and Rankin Bass, that Rankin Bass's later movies by the same director were also co-productions. They did actually have a lot of the same staff. People from Tsuburaya worked on it, but not as part of Tsuburaya. So if you look at the credits, there's nothing in there that says Tsuburaya. By Tsuburaya things in books, they don't say that they worked on it. So that's a quickie. Another one that I hear all the time is just I think a bit of a miscommunication. People always point to Return of Ultraman from 1983 as one of Hideaki Anno's student films. He actually made earlier films that were his student films. Return of Ultraman was made as a kind of a semi-professional project after he had dropped out of school as part of the Daikon Films project that had really become its own company. So his early student films, you can tell, because it's just him and his friends, there's no costumes, there's no miniatures, he's just playing Ultraman in this blue jumpsuit as opposed to the red and silver one you see from the much more polished Return of Ultraman short. This is just another one that people make up stuff sometimes when they're watching movies, and in Return of Godzilla you have this scene where you see this priest who's smiling and he's on screen for a couple seconds and people are like, what was that about? This is some profound religious commentary. And no, it's a cameo of a character from a sitcom. So that's what it's about. Hiroshi Kamigatsu was on a TV show where he played an English teacher in Japan, and it was just basically reusing his character from Beat Takeshi no Gakumon no Susume, basically showing up in a cameo appearance. So that's all that was about.
It's like if Ted Lasso showed up in Godzilla vs. Kong or something.
Yeah.
So here's one I see that Ishiro Honda was originally going to direct the 90s Mechagodzilla film, and that's just not true. At the time, he was really focusing on his work with Kurosawa, and as far as I know, he was never even asked. He was asked in the 80s to do some things like a Diamond Jane reboot, and even I think Toho might have even said like, "Hey, you want to do a Godzilla movie?" And he was like, "Nah, I'm hanging with Kurosawa." But I don't think anyone even approached him about this. But yeah, the old tale is that he was signed on to direct it and then he died, and then. This is another one that Godzilla vs. Destroya used Bandai figures as miniature destroyers in the movie, which isn't true. Now, if you watch the movie and you see some of the props that are in this still, they are not animated, and even to the effect that you kind of see them like shuffle around when there's like movement on the set. But they look like Bandai toys, and I think that's why people say that, but they're not actual Bandai toys. Now, it is interesting to note that Bandai, often with these things, they provide a lot of the plastic for the props and things, the molds and things like that, but they're not giving them literal toys to use as miniatures. They're providing the plastic and the actual resources to make the miniatures.
Oh, so that's interesting.
Oh, this is painful.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. Okay, so this one is complicated, so just bear with us. So, when Godzilla Final Wars came out, the director, Kitamura, he has him and Shogo Tomiyama, they have that kind of famous quote of like, it took the god out of Godzilla, so when it shows up in our movie, it's referred to as Zilla. And then, Zilla then becomes its own separate character that licensors can license, like, the IDW comic books, because Toho owns that design and everything. But they didn't change the name of the monster. What it is I guess the easiest way to explain it is Toho's view of Zilla is that it's a variant of Godzilla, the same way Kiryu is a variant of Mechagodzilla, per se. And just like, if you're a comic book publisher or something and you want to use the Kiryu Mechagodzilla, that's a separate copyright you have to pay for than the Showa version, the 90s version, whatever. So that's more or less their thinking there. But this is perpetuated that, Toho has disowned the movie and all this, but, it really doesn't take much more than a Google search or eBay search to see that there's, on a regular basis, Toho is still licensing and even creating their own products with that creature, calling it Godzilla. We have the Tanaka model kit. Right next to that is a little keychain of the 98 Godzilla chasing, if you're familiar with the 70s children's series Gimme Gimme Octopus, they did a big merch crossover with Godzilla, and there's that. And then there's the X Plus figure on the right of that. Now this got even more convoluted when Legacy, a toy company, announced a statue for the character as, we're doing the Godzilla 98, and then a few months later they were like, we're doing Zilla, and they put together the image, and now this toy that they were making as Godzilla is now named Zilla, so that's created a whole big mess of confusion.
Yeah, I think a comparable situation is, at one point Good Smile Company wanted to make Kamen Rider Ryuki figures, and they were told, no, Bandai has the license for making Kamen Rider Ryuki figures. So what Good Smile did was they licensed Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, which is an American show that uses footage from Kamen Rider Ryuki, and they made figures from Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, not to be confused with Kamen Rider Ryuki, even though they are exactly the same designs.
Yeah, and to add to that, that Tanaka sculpture in the previous slide and the Legacy Zilla figure both came out this year. So here's another interesting one that Twister was a rewritten version of the 1994 TriStar Godzilla movie that didn't get made. That's not true, but I can kind of see how playing a game of telephone you could maybe get there. what had happened was Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton were contracted to be the stars of the '94 Godzilla movie. And when that got scrapped, they still owed TriStar a film. And so that's what folded them into Twister. Other than that, the two have nothing to do with each other. So this is one that has only kind of become popular in recent years. I never heard it until like a couple years ago. But there's this, if you go to IMDb, Wikipedia, I mean, a lot of sources say that the Stephen Sommers 1998 movie about a giant octopus attacking a yacht, Deep Rising, which is a great movie, by the way. There's this idea that it was a prequel to King Kong. Now, at the end of the movie, spoilers for a 25-year-old movie, if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry. Don't let this prevent you, because it is a really good movie. This is one that like is cool, and so like I kind of wish it was true. But at the end of the movie, the characters are, they defeat the monster, and they swim to a shore, and they feel like they're safe. And at the very end, you hear this huge roar, and the movie cuts to credits. And the myth is that Stephen Sommers did that as a backdoor prequel to King Kong, and he would do a remake of King Kong that uses those characters, and it would be a sequel to Deep Rising. Now, if you look at the time period, 1998, this is still when Universal is trying to get their own Kong movie off the ground. Deep Rising was made for Hollywood Pictures, which was a subset of Disney, and Disney did not own the rights to King Kong. Universal did, and that's at the same time Peter Jackson started his development of his film at Universal, and that didn't get made until 2005. So it really makes no sense that Disney would even be trying to make a Kong film. Now, if you look at the Blu-ray and the special features, there is an interview with the cinematographer who says that Stephen Sommers' kind of pipe dream was that would lead to a sequel, Deep Rising, that would be a new adaptation of Journey to the Center of the Earth, which also sounds like it would be cool. But no evidence anywhere, besides sites like IMDb or Wikipedia, where you can just make something up and put it out there, exists that was any kind of plan.
Speaking of just making stuff up, I often hear like, oh, Godzilla 2000 is a sequel to Godzilla vs. Destroy because you don't get an origin to Godzilla and Godzilla 2000, or like, oh, the design in Godzilla vs. Megaguirus kind of resembles the Godzilla 2000 design, or the Kiryu movie design, so they must be connected. And like, no, the only two Millennium movies that have a connection are Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS. That's just kind of the way it is. I'm sorry.
Another one is if you've seen Reptilian or the 1998 version of Yongari. First of all, I'm sorry. Secondly, that's an interesting one in that it came out and then a couple years later they reissued the movie. Now, when it came out in 1999, there were some suits of Yongari and Saikar, the monsters that were built. And so the myth had become that the 2001 re-release replaced all the monster stuff that was suits with CGI. What it really was, those suits were only used in a small handful of shots. Most of the movie was CGI. You can see there's a documentary, Yongari Chronicle Project on YouTube that even shows some of the original monster footage from the 99 version compared to the 2001 version. It's mostly CG stuff. So that's another one. There were suits, and they are kind of cool looking, but they were not a big part of that film. Another one I still see is that there was a third Kiryu Mechagodzilla film that was scrapped in favor of Final Wars. That seems to originate with this little piece of artwork here that was published in one of the Japanese books when Tokyo SOS came out. It's a cool little piece. It shows mecha versions of all kinds of monsters, the Gargantuas, Varan, Kamebas, a bunch of different monsters, and it's a really neat little piece of artwork, but it was kind of just thrown in that book as a like, hey, these are monsters that, they could make mechas out of, and it was just there as a fun little piece of art. Final Wars was always going to be a big, huge, separate thing for the 50th anniversary of Godzilla, and it was never going to involve the previous Mechagodzilla films.
This is one that we just see come up again and again. I think people have a fixation on Bagan as a monster just because he was this intended Godzilla opponent that never manifested to the point where it's very easy to fool people into thinking that there's some Bagan thing happening when there's not. So, you know, an example was this monster from Justy Riser who was posted a clip without context on YouTube and said, oh, deleted Bagan scene from Final Wars. No, it was from the Toho television series. And then more recently, because the puppet series Gojiban had a Mothra versus Bagan like direct-to-video movie basically made, they have been promoting it with the giant puppet from that special, and people get confused thinking, oh, this is from the new Godzilla movie. It's not. Speaking of Godzilla movies, Takashi Yamazaki is directing the upcoming Godzilla -1. A lot of people say, oh, he's the guy that did the special effects on Shin Godzilla. He did not. This is something that was so widely spread around due to it being on IMDb that CNBC had an article that had to correct it when it turned out that he did not actually work on that movie, even though he works for a company that worked on it, but you know that's not the same as having worked on it.
It's a similar situation where IMDb says Shinji Higuchi was a Japanese production coordinator on Kill Bill, and different Shinji Higuchis, people.
Yeah.
So again, don't always believe what you read on the internet.
This is one that came about, I think, largely due to just a miscommunication at GS, where, speaking of Shinji Higuchi, he was being interviewed about the timeline for working on Shin Godzilla and the back and forth with Legendary, where he said that they had to finish Shin Godzilla by a certain amount of time because he wasn't allowed to be working on something at the same time that there was a movie being made in the US. And because there were animated movies that came out in Japan, people assumed like, oh, this means that he said that the contract only applied to live action movies, but if you watch his interview, he never specifies anything about live action movies there. My read on it is that they probably made the movie, the US movie got pushed back, and they had a 6-month gap where they could make 3 animated movies very quickly and very cheaply.
This one's only a few days old. It's already the upcoming Godzilla -1. There was some kind of translation error at some point where the Toho guy said it follows Shin Godzilla, but what he really meant was that it follows it like this is the next movie. And then that even forced the article on Forbes to kind of rephrase, and it's a standalone thing. It's not in any way related to Shin Godzilla. So that's one I've just heard just from walking around the hallways here. Do we want to get into these ones no one cares about, or should we get some questions? We have some like more obscure ones in here.
What do y'all think?
You want some more?
We'll through a bunch of these. Naoya Matsumoto is the creator of Kaiju number 8, the popular Kaiju manga. Naoya Matsumoto is a suit actor in these Godzilla shorts. They are not the same Naoya Matsumoto. It doesn't make any sense for a manga author to be going around damaging himself when he could be making a lot of money on manga. I always hear that the Leopardon suit from Spider-Man was stolen during production, and that's why it's all stock footage after a certain point, but that doesn't exist in any Japanese documentation. It's just something that you hear at American comic book conventions. I think if it happened in Japan, we would see something about it in Japan. In addition to that, I hear that maybe the suit was reused, cut apart and remade into the Dejimon robot. And honestly, that makes more sense knowing how stuff went at Toei at the time. I hear that the Marvel Godzilla is the official tallest Godzilla. It's not. It has no official height. They never say how tall Godzilla is in Marvel Comics. Yes, he appears next to a very high Space Needle. Yes, he appears next to the Golden Gate Bridge. Yes, he appears next to Red Roman. All of these things are different sizes, so you can't make an official inference about kind of what his height is. I hear the term Neo Heisei thrown around. That doesn't mean anything. There's the Heisei era refers to the Heisei Emperor in Japan. There's no Neo Heisei Emperor. So, This creature from the teaser trailer for 2014, some people say that its name is Vishnu because it starts with this Oppenheimer quote, which is taken from the Bhagavad Gita, but there's nothing official that ties it. This is a canon name. And just to quickly wrap it up, we keep hearing things about, oh, check out this clip from the next upcoming Godzilla movie, and they are not from the next upcoming Godzilla movie. So, take everything with a grain of salt.